And now, please, for the second debate, please welcome back the moderator, Senator Hugh Siegel.
There's no room for humor or levity. This is a serious debate. This is about the competition between the two great powers, the northern part of this continent. Be it resolved that the future of the United States is brighter than that of Canada. That's what they thought before the War of 1812, but we showed them. Arguing for the resolution, Dan Gardner. Dan is a distinguished columnist for the Ottawa Citizen, a lecturer, internationally acclaimed author of the books Future Babble, Why Expert Predictions Fail and Why We Believe Them Anyway, and Risk, The Science and Politics of Fear. He is a civil voice for the thoughtful right, intolerant of excess in any circumstance, and like everybody in this room, secretly a red Tory. Arguing against Allan Gregg is one of Canada's most recognized and respected senior research professionals, social commentators. As a pollster, he has participated in over 50 general elections across Canada and on 3 continents. He has his own talk show on TVO, lectures at the business school at Queen's, and was one of the first to see the potential of the Kingston rock band, the Tragically Hip. And in Kingston, that is very serious stuff. Beyond any partisanship now, he argues for a more honest politics, where truth is not always the last thought to occur to those who are in office. Here's the format for tonight. Each debater will have 8 minutes to present their thesis, with Dan starting first. We will then have 4 minutes for each for rebuttal. I will then ask the debaters a question, which they will get a chance to respond to. Then they will each get a minute to conclude their side of the debate, and then we will have a vote as to whom you think actually carried the case more effectively. Let me call on both debaters to join us on stage. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's an elephant in the room, so let me start by acknowledging the pachyderm in our presence. It is that the United States has very big problems. There's the deficit, there's the debt, there's rising income inequality, there's economic stagnation, and there's a political class that has manifestly failed to meet the challenges that the United States faces. And as a result of that, there's also a crisis of trust. Americans don't trust the political class to solve its problems. They don't trust the political class to deliver a future that is better than the present, which is really kind of depressing, and it's a bad way for me to start if I'm going to say that the United States has a better future than we do. But the funny thing is about that description, as accurate as it is about the United States today, it's an accurate description of the United States in 1992. It's also an accurate description of the United States in 1982, in 1979, and 1974. The United States has faced these problems many times, and every time the United States has come back stronger than before. In fact, it's something of a recurring theme in American history. Every time there's a problem, Jeremiah'd show up to say the United States is finished. It's all decline from here. In 1968, an eminent political scientist published a book called The End of the American Era. In the early 1960s, economists said the economy of the Soviet Union was going to surpass that of the United States. Sputnik, you remember Sputnik? The Great Depression, well, that's obvious. 1907 fiscal crisis, the United States is finished. The Great Depression of the 1870s, which I'm sure you all remember, the United States is finished. The Civil War, the United States is finished. Every single time, the United States came back stronger than before. I'm going to suggest to you the same will happen again. But if you're being skeptical, and I hope you're being skeptical, you're going to say past results are no guarantee of future performance. There's no reason to think necessarily, that because the United States came back stronger than before, that it will again come back stronger again, right? And that's true. That's absolutely true. But let me ask you this. Why did the United States, every time it faced a crisis, why did it come back stronger than before? And I will suggest to you that in the past, that is because the United States is fundamentally an open and creative society. It's a society that admires ambition. It's a society that encourages risk-taking. And that invites its people to dream big dreams. And it attracts like-minded people from all over the world. It attracts the scientists, the visionaries, the inventors, the artists, the builders. And as a result, the United States became the world's dynamo. It's an incredibly dynamic, creative society. That was true in the past, and it is still true today. It is absolutely true today. Of the top 10 universities in the world, 8 are American. Of the top 20 universities in the world, 17 are American. Of the top 50, 36 are American. Or consider Nobel Prize winners. Look at the nationality of Nobel Prize winners. Americans have won the Nobel Prize 339 times. No other nation even comes close. The UK is second at 117. And by the way, that statistic actually understates the reality. Because when you look at all those foreign nationals who won the Nobel Prize and you say, well, where did they do the work that won them the Nobel Prize? What you find over and over again is they did the work in American universities. Since 1980, 14 Canadians have won the Nobel Prize. 10 did their Nobel Prize winning work in American universities. This June, by the way, there are all sorts of manifestations of this dynamism in American society, but where else would you go to see it in its rawest form? Silicon Valley. And this June, I was delighted to be invited to a conference. It was a conference convened by Vinod Khosla, the legendary Silicon Valley venture capitalist. And the room was amazing. A couple of hundred venture capitalists, scientists, inventors, tech geeks, some of the best and brightest people on the planet. The room was crackling with ideas. It was amazing, amazing stuff. And one interesting aspect about that room, the majority of the people were not born in the United States. Most of them, like Vinod Khosla himself, who came from India, were born elsewhere. They came to the United States. They brought their energy, their intelligence, and their vision to the United States. And when you ask those people who are from India and China and Belgium and Britain, I asked one Brit, I said, why? Why are you here? Why aren't you in Britain doing what you're doing? And he said, if you want to do something really big, you have to go to the United States. That is a fact. That is what makes the United States the world's dynamo. And that is why I am optimistic about the American future. But, again, you might say, hang on, terrific. The United States is an open, creative society. But what about the U.S. government's problems? Couldn't that stifle the dynamism of the United States? Couldn't that drag down the future of the United States? Absolutely it could. Absolutely. And the question is then, will the political class get a handle on the problems of the U.S. government? Will it get its house in order? And it's tempting to think, no, that's impossible, right? Look at the polarization. Look at the gridlock. These people can't sit down at a table and agree that the sky is blue. How are they going to craft a compromise to deal with all the difficult problems that have to be dealt with? Let me give you some recent history. Remember I said 1992? 20 years ago, right? Recent history. 1992, one of the big best-selling books was something called Bankruptcy 1995, right? The thesis is the title. The time was really, really pessimistic. And you know what else was happening at that time period? Polarization, rancor, pessimism. 1995. The political class was so at odds, so at loggerheads, that when Newt Gingrich, House Speaker, sat down with U.S. President Bill Clinton, what happened? Not only could they not come up with a compromise, they couldn't even keep the U.S. government open. Right? They literally closed the federal government, put a padlock on the door for almost a month. That's gridlock. Boy, the United States is incapable of handling its problems, right? They'll never come to a compromise. What happened? They came to a compromise. And within a couple of years, they went from deficit and pending bankruptcy to surpluses, to the point where, and we've all forgotten this now, the big debate in the presidential election of the year 2000 was, what do we spend all this money on, right? That's astonishing. Ladies and gentlemen, remember the words of Winston Churchill. The Americans always do the right thing after they have exhausted the alternatives.
Honorable Co-Chair, Mr. Master of Ceremonies, Madam Timekeeper, Senator Moderator, members of the Travers family, and my esteemed opponent, Dan Gardner. Dan, you silly dink. You are supporting an untenable resolution in a town without pity. Also, in a town where, we all know, there can be reprisals if you're on the wrong side of an issue. And that's starting to happen already. I mean, while you were delivering your opening remarks, Vic Tays sent me a text message. Tell your opponent he is either for Canada or for the pedophiles. Wait. Stop. Because now, Rob Anders is tweeting. At D. Gardner is too well groomed to be a journalist. Exclamation mark, question mark, frowny face. Makes no sense. But listen, it does seem, my worthy friend, that you are up against more than whatever arguments I might be able to marshal against this resolution tonight. I will concede that for the better part of modern history, the facts have supported your side of the resolution. Fueled by a revolutionary fervor and personified by the most impressive generation of political leaders on record, within 2 centuries, the United States literally modernized the world. Its worship of enterprise, initiative, and individuals was buttressed by an unwavering belief that theirs was the shiny city on the hill that would provide a beacon for the world to follow. This ethos of exceptionalism gave America an unshakable confidence and focus to pursue its destiny. And it created an unshakable resolve also that allowed them to weather much adversity, becoming ever stronger with each encounter. Canada's beginnings were much more modest. Founded in counter-revolutionary roots, our leaders tended to be more pragmatic than idealistic or inspirational. Still, in the face of a vast and inhospitable terrain, all the while living in the shadow of the most powerful and militaristic nation in civilization, we were able to build one of the most prosperous and generous countries in the world. Absent a unified founding myth or heroes, we nonetheless developed our own unique national persona. One focused not on might and right, but on an ability and even a willingness to accommodate and value differences. In strong contrast to the United States, we view immigration not as a problem to be managed, but as a national asset. The NDP are not vilified as dangerous socialists, but Her Majesty's loyal opposition. And even the BQ are not branded as seditious traitors, but for good or ill, the legitimate government of the second largest region in the land. Far from signs of blandness or weakness, as we look to the future, our ability to accommodate differences and find compromise with otherwise opponents now serves us very well. In contrast, I will argue tonight that the very culture that made the United States not just the most powerful, but I agree, the best country in the world, now serves them very poorly. America's future is clouded not by the fact that they're on some kind of death spiral of decline, but by the rise of everyone else. Moreover, in Thomas Friedman's flattened world, where everyone has access to the same educational curriculum, the same information, and the same invention, values and culture matter more than ever. It is different now. Futures are formed by what you do with this knowledge, rather than in the past where fortunes were determined by whether you possessed it and whether you could make others pay for it. Being the alpha dog, winning every race, and leading the world is in America's DNA. Now, As the world is starting to catch up, there are increasing signs that the United States is suffering from post-hegemonic stress syndrome. The most obvious manifestation of this is how core values that once unified and set the course for America now set them apart and leave them rudderless. The sacred pursuit of individualism now makes America one of the most inequitable nations in the world. Disparities between rich and poor, divisions along ideological and religious lines, have led to the demise of political compromise, and again I will argue later that it's significantly different than under Newt Gingrich or in the mid-1990s, and the erosion of what has been called the vital center. As a consequence, what was one of the most vibrant political system in the world is now virtually paralyzed, and the most dynamic enterprise on the planet is now functionally ungovernable. In the same way, Americans' blind faith that it is destined to lead now makes it almost impossible for them to fit in or follow in an international context. That sense of exceptionalism justifies unilateralism and leaves them increasingly isolated in an ever more connected world. The same fear also makes it impossible for their leaders to disengage from almost $1 trillion in military commitments, choking off expenditures that otherwise might be applied for much-needed social programs and infrastructure, or maybe even making a few friends in the world. Even the ingenuity and innovation that marked American enterprise is now being perverted by their inability to grapple with the prospects of decline. While still a relative powerhouse in things like patent filings, when you look at them as a proportion of the GDP, the United States is now only ranked 5th, behind New Zealand. As a percentage of total R&D that's going on, patents, America is ranked 10th, behind the likes of Poland and Ukraine. In fact, protecting copyright appears to be more important than creating it today in America. And as much vaulted examples of U.S. ingenuity, like Apple, they now spend more on litigation than research and development. Instead of creating a $2,000 car, such as Tata in India, the best and brightest in America seem to be more consumed with developing more derivative products that generate individual fortunes, but no national wealth. And it isn't by chance that Canada has fared better in the post-meltdown period of 2007 and 8. In the same way that we have no qualms about and there's no protest against things like limitations on election expenses, our more collectivist impulse led us to regulate our financial service sector. In fact, the very absence of an unassailable national ideology means that compromise is not only possible, it is also still highly valued in Canada. And as a middle power, we have also known that cooperation rather than conflict serves our interests on the international stage. Consequently, Canada fits more easily into our interconnected, flattened world and has the potential to be friends to all nations. And because of the value we place on our multicultural makeup, we are now positioned to harness our ethnic diaspora as ambassadors to expand trade between their new and former homelands. No one disputes that there are forces shaping and changing the patterns of power in the world. And few would dismiss the great threats that these changes pose to the status quo. What is at issue now is how well equipped nations are to adapt to adversity and how resilient their culture is when it comes time to rise up to these challenges. Compared to the United States, I have to say, Canada's future looks very bright. Thank you.
Invite Dan to offer a rebuttal, and he'll be followed by Alan.
Mr. Gregg, inspired by your humor and eloquence, I will now recite productivity statistics. I'm not kidding. Canada faces two huge problems: population aging and productivity. Everybody knows about this. We see it coming. Population aging. It's going to be an enormous pressure. What do we do about it? Simply to maintain our standard of living, we have to have enormous gains in productivity. We're not getting enormous gains in productivity. The opposite is happening. Our productivity is stagnant. It's a catastrophe. Long-term, maintained, we will suffer for it. Our future will be worse for it. That is fundamental. Do you know what else is happening? The United States is getting excellent gains in productivity. The United States is pulling ahead in productivity. But then you say, well, hang on a second, hang on, isn't Canada doing so much better than the United States? And of course the answer is yes, we are doing better than the United States. You said it was not by chance. Well, let me suggest it was by chance. It was by the accident of the fact that we are squatting on a large pile of commodities during one of history's greatest commodity booms. We're selling stuff that people want at high prices, which is why we're doing remarkably well, which is terrific, until the commodity boom ends, as all commodity booms do. What happens then? What happens when our productivity has been stagnant for decades and the commodities boom ends? Well then, ladies and gentlemen, I would suggest that you will want to be in the United States. Governance. This consultation, negotiation, and cooperation you speak of sounds delightful. I do not recognize it in the federal government. One-man rule is not negotiation and cooperation. We don't have gridlock, and it's terrific. You know, our system of government is good for certain things. As we learned from Italian experience, it can keep the trains running on time. But it's not so good for bringing in new ideas, new blood, negotiation, compromise, and so on. Long term, we will suffer for it. And there's a more fundamental problem going on, and I'll illustrate it with the story of Elon Musk. Elon Musk, as some of you may know, is the brilliant entrepreneur behind Tesla Motors, behind SpaceX. Brilliant, wonderful man. Every nation on the earth wants an Elon Musk. And guess what? Canada was lucky. Elon Musk's mother is Canadian. He grew up in South Africa, but he came to Canada because his mother is Canadian. He went to university at Queen's, and then he left. He went to the United States. He went to the United States, and he was asked why. He said, because in the United States, that's where great things are possible. Canada isn't the kind of country where people stand up and say, great things are possible here. No, we're the kind of country where you stand up and say, Canada is a country where you can do reasonably well under the circumstances. We are a risk-averse, comfortable country. Like, it's good enough. Everything's good enough. You can see it in our universities. Of the top 10 universities in the world, 0 are Canadian. Top 20, not 1 is Canadian. Top 50, 2 are Canadian. Are you proud? Okay? Business, Canadian business is the same thing. We're not exploiting opportunities in developing countries. Why? Because things are good enough. We're not investing in trade in machinery and in training. And that's one of the reasons why our productivity is so bad. Why? Because things are good enough. Right? That should be our national motto, not for